So today we are joined by four really amazing advocates and activists in the Houston community that I'm very delighted to introduce you to. And speakers, what I'll have you do is introduce yourself, share your pronouns and your organization just to get started. And then we'll move on to more questions in a few minutes.
Good morning. How are you doing? My name is Doris Brown. My pronouns are she, her. I am on staff at West Street Recovery, and I am also the co-founder of the NAC, the Northeast Action Collective.
I can go next. My name is Carmen Cavezza. I work for the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience, CER, and I'm the climate justice organizer. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I work very closely with the climate ambassadors leading the climate justice campaign. So this conversation is really close to our work.
Hi, my name is Rita Robles. I go by she, her. I'm a Denver Harbor resident. I work with the climate ambassadors with CER. I'm a vice president with the Denver Harbor Civic Club. I'm also the prime minister of Carnalizo Brown Beret of Houston. And I'm a Denver Harbor resident, but I also work in other neighborhoods like Kashmere Gardens, 5th Ward, 2nd Ward, Magnolia, wherever I'm needed. Thank you.
And I'm Reverend James Caldwell. I am the director and founder of COCO, Coalition of Community Organizations, and carry a lot of other different hats as well, but too numerous to address now. But just happy to be here this morning.
So glad that you're here. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Stephanie Thomas. I work with an organization called Public Citizen, and I'm part of the Houston Climate Movement. And I'm going to be the facilitator or the moderator of our time together. And, you know, as the Houston Climate Movement was thinking about this panel discussion, we were thinking about it in a few ways. And I'm going to just share my screen for people who can see. And for those of you who can't, I'll let you know what my screen says. Let's see.
And Stephanie, if I may add just something, we have some Spanish speakers here. Myrtala understand a little bit English. There's a couple they don't. But I think this conversation is very important. So we invite them to, because their neighborhoods are getting really affected by climate change. So if I can just, at the end of one presenter, do a really quick summary, really briefly. I know it's going to take us a little bit longer, but I think it will be very good to include them.
Thank you for that, Carmen. I really appreciate that. It's really important to have access to content, and I really appreciate you filling that gap, because we don't have someone interpreting today. So thank you, Carmen. Thank you for your willingness. And if you'd like to just kind of summarize what we've said so far, that would be helpful.
Sure. So, buenos días a las personas que hablan español. Esta conversación va a ser en relación al cambio climático. Ya presentaron a los que vamos a estar haciendo esta como discusión, esta clase de preguntas que vamos a tratar de informar a la gente cómo está afectando el cambio climático. Miss Doris es una de las presentadoras, Rita Robles de Denver Harbor, James Caldwell, Reverend James Caldwell de Quinto Barrio, Fifth Ward, y Carmen Cavezza, que trabaja para la Coalición de Environmental y Equity, que es CER. Ahorita lo que va a explicar Stephanie es cómo todas estas cosas están conectadas. No voy a poder explicar paso por paso y palabra por palabra porque no tenemos suficiente tiempo, pero los voy a tratar de incluir haciendo como una sumaria, un pequeño resumen de lo que vamos a estar hablando. Ahorita Stephanie va a presentar por qué todas estas cosas están conectadas, que no nada más es el cambio climático lo que tenemos que tomar acción, sino también ciertas cosas que tenemos que poner atención, como pobreza, como cosas que tenemos que trabajar, no solo en el cambio climático, para realmente mover ¿cómo se dice?, las metas que tenemos que lograr, ¿verdad? Una de ellas es la pobreza extrema en muchas de nuestras comunidades y a nivel mundial. Y ella quiere traer lo que está pasando en el mundo a cómo lo podemos manejar en nuestras comunidades. No nada más verlo así como algo que está pasando muy lejos de nosotros, sino algo que nos está afectando continuamente. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Carmen. So to start our conversation, I wanted to bring your attention to something called the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is something that comes to us from the United Nations. Here we go. And these are 17 goals that are related to sustainability that I think is important for people to know about. Climate action is one of those goals, one of the key things that is needed for sustainability, but so are things like no poverty and no hunger and healthcare and education and gender equality and affordable energy, work opportunities, infrastructure, reduced inequalities. So peace, justice, partnership, life on land, life on water. There's a number of these goals, which I think are important to highlight, because it's not just climate change in a vacuum. The issues that are surrounding us on a day-to-day basis, like racism, like poverty, like other inequalities, like education, these issues all feed into each other. And so addressing climate action requires us to address other issues as well. And addressing other issues helps address climate action. So I wanted to make that case. And I also wanted to talk about the UN for another reason, because there's these meetings that happen every now and again, and there's about to be one happening in Scotland soon, where countries get together to talk about climate action. And as nations are talking about climate action, and as we're having even conversations at the national level right now regarding some of the federal legislation, climate action is being discussed. But I think it's really important not to rely on just what's happening at the UN or just what's happening at the federal level and say, okay, that's climate action, we don't have to worry about it here, because I know that many people on this call have been already impacted by climate change. The Houston area has been through climate disaster after climate disaster lately. So we're currently already being impacted. We're currently already taking action in ways that we might not even recognize as climate action. So that's part of the reason for the conversation today. And of course, there's things that we can do, like reduce our energy usage, kind of these personal things that some of us have access to do and can move forward on it. There's things that we can do around flooding, both regionally, locally, as homeowners in particular. There might be some things that we can do. But this idea of addressing climate change really is not just about one of us taking an individual action, that this is an opportunity for collective action, enlisting our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, our temples, our civic associations, our super neighborhoods, and encouraging not just the UN and the what's happening at the federal level, our Congress people, but also encouraging City Council and Harris County Commissioners Court to offer programs that can really help address this at a local level. And of course, we don't necessarily have anyone from the city or from the county here to talk today. I think that'll be an opportunity for a future discussion. But I think there's a lot that we can talk about together. And in some ways, what we talk about here together is maybe even more important than some of those conversations about the city and the county. So the first question I have for our panelists, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Here we go. The first question I have for the panelists today is, what out of some of the solutions for climate change that you've heard discussed, what of these ideas work for your neighborhood? Those might be things like solar panels or electric cars. I hear a lot of conversation about that. Do those ideas work for your neighborhood? What other solutions might you see? And what does climate action look like for your community?
If I just do a quick recap. Para las personas que hablan español, si se fijaron en todas las fotos que presentó Stephanie, eso es lo que ella quiere hacer, estas conexiones, que cambio climático no nada más es solamente una de las cosas que tenemos que tomar acción, ¿verdad? Pero también el agua, el aire y los animales que se están viendo afectados por todo esto. Entonces, cada una de las fotos que ella presentó ahí son muy explanatorias, se explican prácticamente solas de todas las cosas que tenemos que conectar. Y ahorita lo que vamos a hacer es una serie de preguntas que Stephanie ya preparó para nosotros. Una de ellas es, ¿de qué manera se ha visto afectada a tu comunidad? ¿Y cuáles son las cosas cuáles son las cosas que deberían ser como prioridad en tu comunidad? Entonces, ahorita vamos a tratar de responder estas preguntas. Y si alguien que habla español quiere preguntar algo, por favor, hágalo también levantando su mano o poniendo su, no sé si saben cómo hacer la reacción. De esa manera sabemos que ustedes necesitan hablar.
Thank you, Carmen. So just to restate the question, what of these ideas about climate action work for your neighborhood? Some of the ideas that you hear about, like solar panels and electric vehicles, and what other ideas or solutions should be added, and what does climate action look like for your neighborhood?
Steph, this is Reverend Caldwell. There were some questions, I think, in the chat. And I think before we get into the conversation, I think some definition of some of those terms or terminology. I think someone asked, what is a pool EV? And someone that made some contacts or some inquiries in the chat. Of course, we want to address, and I think someone's trying to answer it now in the chat, but still, nevertheless, explaining those terms, what we're talking about. Just want to offer that to you, and then we can go ahead and let's get back into the conversation.
Yeah, great. And I think the question that happened in the chat, someone had suggested pool EVs for downtown as a possible solution. I will say that we are going to do a breakout room at the end where people can talk about solutions that they see for their communities and their neighborhoods after the panel discussion. So I do want to let people know that there will be an opportunity to discuss this in more detail for your neighborhood and your community. But this question was, what is a pool EV? That would be like a fleet of electric vehicles that you can rent and use for a short time and kind of check out, kind of like some of the bikes that you might have seen downtown or may have used. You can just check them out for a little bit. And you know, there's another thing that maybe I'll just explicitly say this in the question, in that I was asking, what are some of the other solutions that should be added? Because, you know, maybe things like transit are important, or things, how we address flooding risk are important. So I want to make sure, you know, that this question's more broad than just talking about solar panels. And Miss Doris, you look very thoughtful. Would you like to kick us off?
Yes, sir. Some of the things that I would see would be being more proactive in your neighborhood and communities. West Street and NOC have taken a proactive approach. We educate and we try to train our residents of the neighborhood. We do planning on how to get out of the neighborhood in case we have to evacuate. We also teach the residents. We distribute a bunch of go bags. So these are things that, and we do generators. We started a link tree so that we could identify the escape routes and different things for coming out the neighborhood in case we get flooded in. Most of the neighborhoods out here on the northeast side, we are historically disenfranchised and disinvested in. So we have a lot of flooding issues out here, pollution, and we're working on this proactively. I think that's.
If I can add something, Stephanie, I don't know, Ms. Doris, are you done with your?
Yeah, I lost that thought. It comes with age.
That's okay. I just so you did. It's just what you explained is like a flooding is a big important thing, right? But when I came into the community and start talking about climate change, I saw these connections that people were so focused on one thing, but didn't see the whole picture of how climate is impacting everything. And right now, looking at the pictures that Stephanie put, we cannot address just flooding without addressing pollution. We cannot address water without addressing, the things that we have on land, the pollution. So in the neighborhood that I work, like most of you know, I work in the Northeast community. So it's 5 neighborhoods and they share a lot of the same problems. Flooding is one of those, but pollution in the air and pollution on the land is another one. So when it rains and floods, all the pollution in the land, it just gets into there. We try to focus into one thing to really be effective. And the way that we see that we can kind of prepare more the community that they are impacted is with retrofitting homes. Is one program that we're trying to put together where we can address several issues, right? Reducing electricity burning, reducing greenhouse gases if we go into solar or more effective energy, and also protecting the communities that they are not being invested for a long time. So this is how I see working, like connecting the issues and also trying to put solutions that are proactive. So flooding is very, very prevalent in this community.
Thank you, Carmen, and you too, Ms. Doris. And Stephanie, I think all of you have interjected something that's very important in connecting the dots when you talk about climate change. It was introduced when you first presented it, how it affects food, how it affects land, water, housing, infrastructure. You mentioned the solar panels, you mentioned the air quality. We look at emissions on the east end, and of course with our bus and trucks and highways. Let's think in terms of the infrastructure. What is being put in place that's going to address flooding issues, congestion issues that will have or are having an impact on our communities. When we think in terms of climate change, we're not talking about the climate itself, we're talking about the long-term impact and effect it will have on communities, and the majority of those are communities of color. And there are so many factors involved in that when we think in terms of the impact. One can't get tunnel vision on this. You can't focus on one because one impacts the other. It impacts the economic growth, it impacts the infrastructure, it impacts the housing, it impacts the health care, all of these factors. And we see that, we saw that with Harvey. We saw it with Uri, and these are climatic events that occurred. But what can we do as far as communities are concerned to lessen that overall impact on our communities, and who do we address to make sure that those issues are resolved or at least addressed? And I think Ms. Doris hit it on the head, getting our communities informed and educated on the issues and the impact that these events can have on us, and the long-term effect, the neglect that has already occurred over the past years and decades, and the long-term impact and effect it will have on it. This call does not necessarily include any of our elected officials or anything of that nature. And in my perspective, it shouldn't. It should include community and community members, because we're the ones who needs to have the knowledge, the information, and be able to be connected to the resources that's going to address those concerns. Because a lot of our impacts on our community have been as a result of climate change, and will in future perhaps have a greater impact. I think we got a no idling ordinance put in place. We may not view it as such, but trucks and buses idling for hours and things that have an impact on our climate and our environment. I don't want to go too far, but we talk about the I-45 expansion and the port expansion. All of these are going to have impact on our communities and may further increase the overall impact of climate change on our communities, and especially along the Gulf Coast of Texas.
Thank you, Reverend Caldwell. You know, and not only would it, I feel like not only would it do that, but it would exacerbate health-wise. You know, it's the gas emissions, the greenhouse gases that are emitted, they are very toxic, and we have a lot of stagnant water, and people don't realize that how it plays on their health, how it plays on their children's health. And this has been problematic for a long time. And like you said, these issues have not been addressed, and it's just ongoing, because now we have a lot of children that are growing up with asthma. Excuse me, Carmen, I forgot that he was doing translation. So I'm going to stop my train of thought at this point and let you translate.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick summary. Para las personas que hablan español, la pregunta que hicimos está basada como en soluciones en tu comunidad. Son algunas de las que proponemos, son como paneles solares, energía limpia, ¿verdad? Que va a reducir las emisiones de los que se llaman greenhouse gases, y lo quiero decir así para que realmente empiecen a conectar esos dos conceptos, porque eso es lo que está causando las tormentas y los huracanes más fuertes. Miss Doris habla de la problemas con la infraestructura de que colecta agua. No hay suficientes áreas allá que protegen las comunidades de inundaciones. Reverend Caldwell habló también de la polución, cómo todas estas cosas están conectadas, ¿verdad? Y cómo una solución sola para un solo problema no puede realmente resolver todos los problemas que las comunidades enfrentan. Ahorita Miss Doris está hablando de las conexiones con la salud. Y esto también es muy importante, porque en esas áreas todo esto se multiplica y los problemas de la salud van a ser mucho más evidentes. Thank you, Doris.
And sure, Caldwell. Stephanie, if you would, I think, and I don't know who all is on the call. I know there's quite a few participants. Explaining, sharing, what are we talking about when we talk about climate change? You know, the short and long-term impact and effect. So if you would, because I don't think a lot of us community members understand what we're talking about when we say climate change. And as we move further along, we're talking about resiliency plan and all these other things. Exactly what are we talking about? What are we actually saying to our communities, and what does it mean, and how does it affect me? So if you would, Stephanie, just briefly.
Yeah, Rev, I'm happy to give just a couple minutes of some of the things that we're talking about. So, you know, you were mentioning there's these long-term trends, right? So on the long term, one of the things we know is it's getting hotter. And for instance, the first half of my life was much cooler than the second half of my life. The second half of my life has been record-breaking temperatures almost every year. And so we're seeing this trend toward much warmer temperatures. And in the Houston area, we'll see, you know, days where we're getting much hotter temperatures pretty consistently. We're going to have longer summers, things like that. So there's kind of these longer term trends. But then one of the things climate change also does is it changes how water moves around our planet, right? So one of the things you may notice living in Houston is that the rain acts a little differently than it used to. And we tend to get these storms that flood our neighborhoods more frequently now than we used to. We might also get some drier spells in between where, you know, before we might have seen more, you know, shorter rainfalls happening on a more regular basis. So those are some of the changes that we're talking about when we're talking about climate change. And even like that winter storm that happened, that can be tied to climate change as well, some of these really extreme weather events. So we're talking about these longer term transitions to more warm weather, but also just because we have a winter storm, that doesn't mean that that's not climate change, because we're also getting just more extreme weather that people call it climate disruption. Or another word that I've heard is global weirding, right? And there's these two ways that we can protect ourselves, like these two general big categories. One being we have to reduce what's causing climate change, and what we know is those are these gases in the atmosphere, greenhouse gases, that come from a lot of things like cars and trucks and refineries and a whole range of different sources. But then also we need to think about, and I think Ms. Doris, you were talking about this when you were answering, is how do we prepare as a community, because some of these changes are already happening. And so, yeah, thinking about emergency response, that's a really good way of doing that.
Stephanie, let me just kind of clarify that. Lo que Stephanie y Reverend Caldwell presentaron ahorita es muy importante que ustedes hagan la distinción de lo que es el cambio climático y lo que es el clima. El clima es lo que nosotros checamos normalmente en el tiempo. Va a llover mañana, va a estar muy caliente el fin de semana. El cambio climático, lo que estamos hablando son los cambios que ha experimentado el clima por un tiempo muy largo. Estamos hablando de más de 5 años, de 10 años. Estamos hablando de 30, 40, 50 años. Y lo que Stephanie decía, que la primera parte de su vida, el clima no era tan caliente, y la segunda parte de su vida ha sido muy, muy caliente. Entonces, con esto te das una idea de que estamos hablando de cambios en el ambiente por mucho tiempo y que se están haciendo peor. Y esto quiere decir que estamos produciendo muchos gases que están contribuyendo a esto. Entonces, no confundan cómo va a ser el clima el día de hoy y mañana a cómo ha sido y lo que va a ser el cambio climático dentro de 10 o 20 años.
Thank you, Carmen. And Rita, just want to check in with you and see, what are the solutions for climate change that you're thinking about for your neighborhood?
Well, my neighborhood is one of the older neighborhoods in Houston. A lot of the houses that were built here, they were built after the military forts were here, and the houses were built for the officers. And then from there, it kind of grew into a neighborhood, a suburban, in other words. It used to be called Podunk. And there's a story behind that, but I'm not going to get into that. But it was called Podunk, predominantly white. You had to use like one of the main streets, I think it was Lyons, to get into downtown. But a lot of these houses are built in the 30s and the 40s and then the 50s. So they're predominantly wood, planks, maybe brick. And so they need a lot of repairs. So, and they're not energy efficient. So they need like retrofitting. Like for instance, my dad's house, he needs a lot of work. It was built in the 80s and, it's almost 40 years old. So you can only imagine these other homes that are like on cinder blocks. The cold air, the hot air gets under the houses. A lot of these houses that have the pipes underneath. So they need to be retrofitted to be more, to bring them up to date, bring them up to code, be more energy efficient, possibly the smart meters for the gas, the natural gas, or the electricity. Insulation would be a big thing, a big issue, not only in the walls, but in the attics. They would have to be, we thought about maybe getting a solar panel farm in the area. That's something that we're in talks with people like in Sunnyside. They did that. That would be good, or getting solar panels on their homes. Also, just simple things like changing the light bulbs to the energy efficient light bulbs. There's just so much that needs to be done. And it's not something that could be done just, overnight. It's going to take a long time. Yeah. So I would hope that we can get that, started soon, getting the people on top of that and being a part of it.
Thank you, Rita. This is from Caldwell. And, I was just noticing in the chat what someone mentioned about the impact that the CO2 has from the ports, ships, buses, and all the above. with that expansion. And correct me if I'm wrong, Steph, but I believe that a lot of the pollutants, especially air pollutants, that are affecting our communities, Fifth Ward, Northeast Houston, and in some cases, as was the case with the ITC fire, you know, it can affect other areas of Houston as well. But addressing those community concerns, she mentioned solar panels, air monitors, things of that nature, so that when we address issues in our community, we can pretty much document it. We want to be engaged in that process from a community perspective. But in order to be engaged, we have to have knowledge and a better understanding of what is actually taking place in our community, understanding what climate change is and the impact, the overall long-term impact that it has and is having and will continue to have on our communities. You know, a lot of our health issues are asthma, cardiovascular, all, and in some cases, well, not in some cases, quite a few cases, cancer. These are some of the health impacts long-term because a lot of the environmental issues haven't been addressed, and some of them have been increased. The impact has been increased as a result of no one addressing the climate change issue. You know, we talk about Houston itself. Houston is, I think it's been referred to in the past, the ozone capital of the world. So, so these are a lot of factors that will add to, and Stephanie was talking previously about the storms, Uri, and we've had Harvey, we've had Ike, we've had all of these others, and the intensity of these storms is getting greater and having a greater impact on not just Houston, but communities all along the Gulf Coast. And that's how we look at how we should begin to view climate change, the growth, the intensity, and the real impact and long-term impact it has. When a Harvey came, we're still recovering from Harvey. We're still recovering from Ike. We're still recovering from Uri. Folks over in Louisiana are still recovering from the storm that just went through there. So that's the long-term impact: infrastructure, housing, healthcare, all of these factors, academics. You know, we have to be able to connect the dots and see. We rush food to various locations that are impacted by natural disasters. That's a temporary fix. What do we put in place to sustain those communities? You know, so it's just a few of the things that we want to try to get to, begin to address and see the bigger picture and understand that we're not looking at climate change with tunnel vision. It's bigger than what we see on the surface.
Thank you, Rev. And Carmen, if you want to just do a quick summary, then we'll move on to our next question.
Sure. Lo que el reverendo ahorita explicó es de que no podemos ver esto a través como de una pantalla pequeña, ¿verdad? Que le llama así tunnel vision. Es como ver todo a través de un túnel y ver nada más una foto muy pequeñita al final. Tenemos que abrir nuestra mente y ver que todas estas cosas están conectadas. No podemos hablar del cambio climático sin hablar de los impactos de la salud. Alguien puso en el chat, ¿verdad? Que hay toda la polución que entra por el puerto de Houston. Todas esas cosas están conectadas, entonces las soluciones que él propone tienen que estar conectadas a los problemas que se están produciendo, ¿verdad? Houston está catalogado como la ciudad del ozono. Y para algunos de ustedes que no saben lo que es el ozono es la combustión que es un gas que es resultado de la combustión de la polución de los carros, del smog que tiran los carros, ¿verdad? Entonces, cuando la ciudad de Houston tiene muchos días de ozono, que es días malos, las alergias y el asma se van a hacer peor. Y lamentablemente Houston nunca ha tenido buena calidad de aire. Entonces, por eso Reverend dice que todas estas soluciones tienen que estar conectadas.
Thank you, Carmen. So, you know, we've been talking about some of the impacts of climate change. And one of the things that we're wondering is, how has climate change impacted you personally? And how has it impacted your community, your neighborhood? And how do you see it impacting the Gulf Coast right now?
I can take that, Stephanie. For me, I used to live in New Jersey, And in New Jersey, I experienced two big hurricanes. It was Irene and it was Hurricane Sandy. Sandy was devastating. And it was I was in, like I say, New Jersey, an area that is more prepared for this type of disaster because they have storms and snowstorms very frequently. So I felt that there, the residents were a little bit more prepared and they helped me to be prepared. Then I moved back to California, and the year that I moved back, we have a terrible fire near Isabella Lake. And it was an area that it haven't burned for many, many years. They say over 50 years. So it was devastating. We used to live 40 minutes from there. So the quality of air was terrible. The asthmas were terrible. I was working in community health centers and I saw the impact on the health for those fires. Then I moved to Houston and I came here a week before Harvey hit. So this, what it did to me, it was kind of eye-opening and awakening that is like, no matter where I went, this is happening and every time it's worse. So that's what I decided to change, jobs, and I get into this field. So based on this, to me is like we need to educate more people, right? We need to make people aware that this is going to get worse, that this is going to be, climate change is going to be a multiplier of the issues that the communities are facing. So what it makes Houston very different from the other areas that I was is all the petrochemicals, all those tanks that they are not protected, they are not, the infrastructure is very old. So it was one explosion after another one, ITC fire, then the Harvey inundate all those tanks and all that pollution get into our water. So we're not only dealing with the climate disasters, we are dealing with the poor infrastructure from the petrochemical industry and all the pollution that released during these disasters. So here in Houston is double. And that's what is making this climate change even more urgent for us to take action because we get double one with these disasters.
This is Betty, and I'm the one with my hand raised. I'm gonna let Carmen say what she just said in Spanish, and then I want to speak how my community is being impacted.
Ok, les voy a decir en español que yo sufrí de varias áreas donde me moví el efecto del cambio climático. En Nueva Jersey yo viví durante el huracán Sandy, el huracán Irene. Después me moví a California y fue un fuego en una área que no se había quemado durante 50 años. Vi el impacto de la salud por ese fuego tan tremendo que estuvo en California, que estuvo quemándose todo el bosque por más de una semana. Y luego me moví aquí a Houston y aquí fue Harvey. Y aquí lo que me llamó mucho la atención es que no solamente sufres el impacto del desastre natural, pero también porque tenemos mucha industria petrolera. Y cuando pasa un desastre, la industria petrolera no está preparada para eso. La polución que avientan en el aire y en el agua es tremendo. Los tanques donde tienen todos esos químicos se inundan y dejan salir muchas cosas que van y contaminan nuestra agua. Entonces aquí la gran diferencia de las otras áreas es que tenemos mucha industria que no está siendo responsable y que nos contamina dos veces. Cada desastre que tenemos nos afecta más que en las otras áreas.
Thank you, Carmen. This is Doris. How I am affected personally is that I have breathing problems. I have respiratory problems. There are days when I walk out my front door and because of the ozone watch, I cannot breathe. I walk out, the heat hit me, I have to come back in. I'm being held a prisoner in my own home. The summers are lasting longer, and with all these different flood events, we're just, my neighborhood, I can't get out of my neighborhood. I can't get out of my driveway sometimes because there's a river running down my street. It is just, we are being overwhelmed with all of these rain events. The refinery is right behind my neighborhood over there by the ship channel. So we ingest everyday pollution, methane gases, different pollutions from the stagnant waters in our yards, in our neighborhoods. All these toxins are deadly, these chemicals. We have a dump that burns on the regular at night between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. The smell is overwhelming. It fills your house with gas. And these are ongoing things. These are things that are not being addressed by our city officials. They are not regulated. It seems as though the regulation, Houston has been deregulated. They build concrete batches in our neighborhoods. They have the big trucks that destroy us. It's just, and these are in the Black and brown poor neighborhoods throughout Houston. And this cannot just, I do not know how their plans, they have plans that they are talking about that's going to be 10, 15, 20 years in advance. Well, we don't need that. We need something that's going to happen now, in the here and now, because climate change, it hasn't been addressed for so long. We are in the middle of, just kind of going away, So I don't know. Anyone else? Oh, Carmen, you want to?
We're gonna kind of try to move faster because we're taking too long in the translation to Miss Doris.
Okay.
But lo que Doris quiso decir es de que ella se siente prisionera en su casa por el asma. Y esto que está pasando es muy difícil para ella porque los días de ozono y la polución y la industria que está en su comunidad le está afectando demasiado.
Reverend Caldwell or Rita, do you want to share how climate change has personally impacted you?
If you want, I'll go first, Reverend. I'll try to make it short. I was saying in the chat that I have respiratory problems. I have asthma, and I was also on the verge of getting COPD because I got sick almost 2 years ago, and it was respiratory, but they couldn't figure out what it was. I may have had COVID when it first came out, but we're not sure. They weren't sure back then. They just could say that it was like respiratory or acute respiratory failure. And it was not like a regular asthma attack. Anyway, with that being said, when I came back to live into the Denver Harbor area, I used to live on the south side of I-10. And one day I was coming home in the evening after from going grocery shopping, and I asked my son to come help me. When I was I walked out of the car and I was getting the groceries. All of a sudden, I just breathed in sharply because the Clorox factory, the way the wind was blowing, came directly to us. And I actually went into an asthma attack. My son was like, what the hell? And so I had to go inside, and just like Miss Doris said, sometimes I have to stay inside because I can't go outside because the air is so toxic. Like right now, we've been having high ozone warnings. There's something in the air besides the ozone that I go outside right away. I feel it tickling me in my throat. I can't catch my breath. I start coughing. I start sneezing. And that's just like a chain reaction for me. We have a Clorox factory. We're near a solid waste, the water where they clean out the water. What's the word I'm looking for? Wastewater. And then there's an abandoned one not too far from there, and they never drained it. It's still that way like 20 years later. Plus we're surrounded by the railroad yards of Union Pacific, not far from the creosote plant, the plume. We also have cement companies. The dust is one of the dirt, mold, pollen are all my triggers for my allergies. I literally should live in a bubble. Sometimes I go outside and just breathe in the dust, and I have to run back inside. So that's just right here. I can only imagine how it would be for other areas like the Manchester Dock area or Old Pasadena, Second Ward, Magnolia, and so forth, and Fifth Ward. I mean, they're right there too, Cashmere Gardens. So yes, it impacts me on every day. Also, I'm near the freeway, I-10. So all that dust and air gets kicked up and it's in the air. And a lot of people in my neighborhood, not just me, suffer from respiratory problems and then have other illnesses because of that. Yeah.
Thank you, Rita. Rita's mentioning the local impact. Stephanie at the beginning mentioned the conferences that's being held to address climate change issues. And to be honest about it, it begins locally. we're the ones who are going through and having the impact of climate change. And unless we begin to address it from a community perspective, then our children and our children's children will be impacted by this. We address the healthcare aspect of it, the infrastructure, the housing impact, ordinances being put in place to address idling, and all of the above. But we have to look at this from a long-term perspective. Putting things in place that will protect our neighborhood. We went through, I'd say, the harvest, the ice, and all of the previous disasters. But do we really look at the long-term impact of these disasters and the frequency of these disasters? And what can we do to put in place from a community perspective? We know they're dealing with it from a national and world perspective, but from a community perspective, what can we put in place to protect our neighborhoods, which are vulnerable, and the overall long-term impact of it? We haven't addressed the criminal aspect of it, because let's just face it, when the economic engine in our communities disrupted or torn down, then of course the criminal justice aspect comes into play, because if we're trying to provide for our families, then if we don't have a job, then we find other means of trying to sustain our families. And that's what I mean when I talk about connecting the dots, seeing the impact, the overall impact, of climate change and how it's going to affect over a period of time. And when those events occurs, what's the fallout as a result of those things? How are they going to affect me? How are they going to affect my family? How are they going to affect my community? Will my community be destroyed? We have historically Black and brown communities that are being impacted, and in some cases being dissolved, through gentrification. All of these factors coming into play, and how much of an active role are we going to play in trying to sustain not just our communities, but our families, and begin to address, I say, the health issues, the infrastructure issues, the housing issues, and the overall impact that climate change has had, is having, and will have on our communities. We just touched the surface in regard to healthcare issues and all of the above. That would take a week to go into that discussion and put all those things on the table. But look at the big picture and be prepared to address the issues and problems that are going to, you may not feel like you're impacted by it, but what about your children, your children's children, grandma and grandpa that already have been impacted by it? I would just encourage everyone to come involved, engage, and be able to connect the dots and see the overall impact. And do I know all the overall impact? No, I'm learning just as you are, but I'm willing to learn because I want sustainable, healthy, and quality communities, so that our history, our culture, and our identities can be maintained and sustained.
Thank you, Rev. Carmen, would you like to translate before we move on to the next question?
Yes, Stephanie, I'm trying to put it in the chat so we can, for the sake of time, I'm trying to do like a brief summary. Soy la voy a tratar de ponerlos ahí, María, ahí en la chat. Si pueden tener acceso al chat, pueden ver ahí cuando les escriba algo en español. Zoila y María y Mirtala.
Sí, sí
Sí,
podemos.
ok, voy a tratar de ponerlo ahí conforme van hablando para irnos más rápido, pero le voy a decir rápidamente, Rita se ve muy afectada en su salud. También dice que hay mucha industria y mucha polución en su salud, ¿verdad? En su comunidad, y por eso les está afectando mucho la salud. Reverendo Caldwell dice que tenemos que ver que este problema nos va a afectar a largo plazo. No es algo que va a ser, o ya tuvimos un desastre, lo arreglamos ahorita. No, esto va a ser efectos a largo plazo y que muchas veces no se ven esos efectos inmediatamente. Entonces él quiere ver cuál es la acción que podemos tomar para realmente prevenir esto y estar mejor preparados.
Gracias, Carmen.
So one of the things that the city of Houston has been doing is putting some plans in place, and including a resiliency plan, which isn't entirely just limited to climate change, but is much broader looking at the different shocks and stresses that our city faces and trying to make a plan to adapt and to cope with those shocks and stresses. And I'm wondering from this group, is this a plan that you're familiar with? Have you learned about the resiliency plan? Is that something that that you've heard of from the city or from anyone else in your community?
I haven't heard anything like that.
Yeah, Jeff, I was going to suggest if you would share, take a moment to share what resiliency is and the resiliency plan for the city of Houston.
Yeah, I can just say really quickly that resiliency, there's a lot of different ways to define it, but as I understand it, it's the capacity to bounce back after something happens. And some of those things can be chronic things that happen, like as we're talking about climate change can happen just slowly over time. You get hotter and hotter and hotter, right? But then there's also these shocks that happen, like Hurricane Harvey was a shock to our community. And so the goal of the plan is to deal with these what are called shocks and stressors. So the shocks being the Harveys, the stressors being the things that kind of chronically stress us out, like pollution, like heat, for instance. And I think one of the things I'm curious about, because I think ideally we'd like to know about what's happening at the city and be informed. But that doesn't always happen. So that was why I was interested to know if people here on this call, on this panel, had been aware of this plan. I know that there's a climate action plan, and that is actually, I think, a subset of the resilience plan. But yeah, I was wondering if people were aware that this plan had been created.
Stephanie, I can take that. I'm a little bit familiar, not a lot. Like I'm very familiar with the climate action plan, but not with this one because Houston kind of put it separate, right? And for example, in Austin, it's a plan that is integrated because you cannot do one thing without doing the other. But basically, the climate action plan is mitigation. What we're going to do to decrease the greenhouse gases that are making the storm so powerful. And the resiliency plan is kind of adaptation. What are the things that we have to do to really live with this reality that we have already, right? So, but in the communities that I work, they didn't know about the climate action plan. So I start educating and bringing information about the climate action plan. And when we have a conversation with the mayor, through the mayor, they find out that there's another plan that they call resiliency plan. So they were really upset that all these plans, we don't know much because the city haven't really done a good job. Including us in the planning and in the process. So, but I know the climate resiliency plan is like about 62 actions focusing in 18 goals to really involve in work in collaboration with different entities to make our communities more resilient. And based on that, our conversations with the city, like, okay, you have this plan, you say that those are the things that you need to do. We are trying to partner with them into that retrofit program that we want to implement, because that's what it is to make communities more resilient. Like you say, to bounce back whenever it's a shock.
The city also had implemented the plan for resiliency for the buses, and we had all spoken of this already, how they're trying to alleviate the idling, the greenhouse gases, and the different things like this. And in the Black and brown neighborhoods, if you're trying to alleviate or mitigate these things, why would you have, this is just a personal thought of mine, they have on this resiliency plan, they have people that work in the oil and gas industries, like Exxon and Mobil. And when I heard this, I was thinking to myself, why put a fox in the hen house? This was my thought. I mean, you have people that have worked their lifetime in the oil and gas industries. These same people that have been emitting this greenhouse gases, but you put them on a task force to try to come up with a good resilience plan, and then there's no transparency. I had to question that, but I guess they didn't include us in this planning. So
yeah, you're right, Miss Doris. Fox in the hen house is a good analogy, but a lot of that responsibility and obligation is on us as well. You know, we have to be more vocal. We have to be more engaged. We have to be more involved. We have to be better educated, get more wisdom, and don't just stand by and sit by idly and allow these things to occur. It's going to have these impacts on our neighborhoods. Yeah, resiliency is your ability to be able to bounce back from with a degree of time, you know, not over a long period of time, but to be able to bounce back. All of it was what, 5 years ago? 5 years, you know, folks are still bouncing back. Uri was several months ago. Folks are still bouncing back. It should not take that long, but the voices in our communities need to coalesce, come together, and address not just the deficiencies in the resiliency plan, but some of the deficiencies in the climate action plan with the city of Houston. Because whether you realize it or not, we're the ones going to be impacted by it. We're the ones going to get the most severe impact. So, you know, you'll hear me say this constantly, but just I encourage everyone to become more involved, become more engaged, become more knowledgeable about issues and situations that are going to affect you. And if you don't really care about whether or not it affects you or not, what about your children? What about your loved ones? You know, I mean that because when we're talking about climate change, all environmental issues, all these issues that we've discussed today, it may not affect you personally, or you may not feel that it does, but you have to be willing to come to the table, have that discussion, you know, understand the long-term impacts on you, your family, your loved ones, your communities, because this is a struggle, this is a fight, and it's going to be ongoing. And unless you, this which is our motto here at COCO, unless you have a seat at the table, you're going to be on that menu, and you will continuously be on that menu, and you'll be picked, and you'll be fried and baked and all of the above. So in order to have an input or say on the resiliency plan, become engaged. In order to have an input or say on the climate change and the climate action plan, because everything that we've been discussing and will discuss here on here is affecting our communities. This is not abstract. It's not about them or they. This is about us. More knowledge, more wisdom, understanding, better understanding we can get about issues. Then the better we can begin to address those issues, the better we can bounce back, have more resiliency, and a better understanding on how to address this. And that also includes addressing our elected officials and those who are the decision makers in our community and in our cities. So.
Great. You know, one of the follow-up questions that I think you're getting into, Reverend Caldwell, is, you know, what are the most important things that we need to be focused over the next 5 years or the next 10 years, or even the next year? Like, what do we need to prioritize now in terms of climate change and climate action?
I think, first of all, we need to acknowledge and recognize the fact that it's real. It's real, and we're being impacted by it. If we're not being impacted by it, we feel that we're not being impacted by it. And someone we know, someone we love, some community that we are working with or working in or living in is being impacted by it. So that's first. Understand and acknowledge and have a willingness to acknowledge that when we talk about climate change, when we talk about environmental issues, when we talk about a resiliency plan, and all being able to connect all these dots to see the full and whole big picture and the impact it's having on our communities. I think once we get to that realization of recognizing that it's real, we can begin to see all these long-term impacts.
Hi, this is Kirk Jackson. I just want to make a comment. I think that.
Kirk, would you mind reserving your comment? We're going to have a more open discussion afterward. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
No,
Oh, go ahead, Doris.
This is why I say that we have to be more proactive in our communities. That's what Reverend Caldwell was saying. We got to be true to the new. Those of us that we have to educate our community members. We have to band together. Everyone needs to step up, step out, and get involved. And this is something that has to be done. Start at the community level, starting with the residents in these neighborhoods and in these communities, not just in Northeast Houston, but all around. We have to band together and go at our elected officials. We have to get more involved in everything. If we don't start working for ourselves at the community level, we are not going to be, just like you were saying, our generation is coming up behind us. We're not teaching them. They don't know what's really happening. They just know that it's getting hotter, summer's longer. We'll study having rain events that are catastrophic. It's an ongoing thing. And it starts with being more proactive, getting involved. Carmen, you were saying?
Yes, Doris. What I say, I want to kind of tie all this to the impact of our health. There's a difference of 20 years life, according to where you live in the city of Houston. So that really tells you how different climate change is impacting people, right? So if you live in the Memorial area, you can live 20 years longer. If you live in these communities where pollution is so prevalent, your life expectancy is 20 years less. So I think one of the priorities is definitely do investment in infrastructure in these communities, but also to bring the healthcare industry to kind of level the field a little bit, because the health outcomes shouldn't be based on where you live. Everybody should have rights and had rights to have a good health. So we live in Houston, where we have one of the biggest medical centers in the nation. And right there in Fifth Ward, we have 3 cancer clusters. So definitely the healthcare sectors need to be more involved. SEER is working in this campaign, and we were able to bring 2 partners, Dr. Perkinson and Legacy, as partners in working in connecting how climate change is impacting our health. And we hopefully gonna be developing very soon a curriculum where we're gonna be educating more providers to join into this advocacy. Because what we find out is the providers they don't have a lot of the time because they have to do a lot of documenting, right? But they also missing the opportunity. They have a big voice, and they can use that voice to advocate and put pressure on elected officials about the cost of doing nothing, right? How much is gonna cost to the healthcare industry to have these health disparities. So I think besides infrastructure, we also have to invest in this area on healthcare.
Great. And I think there's some other things that are already happening in Houston. Rita mentioned in Sunnyside, they're making a solar farm there. And I'm wondering, what are some of the things you'd like to see for your community? People, like, it's a basic thing like planting trees, but it can be really helpful, in terms of helping to cool off neighborhoods. That's something that can happen, or community gardens can be really helpful too, in terms of, creating a space for people to access food locally and have it be grown in their community. What are you seeing that's happening in your neighborhoods that you think is a positive step forward in addressing climate change, and what do you want to see more of?
Well, I'll go first. In my neighborhood, I would like to see that we have the homes in the area become retrofitted so that they could be more energy efficient. When the winter storm Uri happened, there were many people in this neighborhood that were affected that did not have electricity for 2, 3, 4 days, 4 or 5 days that they didn't have electricity, and they didn't have running water because their pipes burst. Now, if the homes were retrofitted so that they could be energy efficient, then they wouldn't have to worry so much about something like that happening, from the grid. When I don't know how exactly it affects, older homes that are not energy efficient compared to energy efficient homes in other neighborhoods. But I know that one of our areas, including ours, my area, were some of the last ones to get their electricity back on. I don't know if it was because they didn't have as many people in other areas, or if because they're not energy efficient. I just know that a lot of people did not have electricity. And also another thing that would be good for our area would be to have maybe a solar panel farm or solar panels on the homes. And then also another thing would be good is that we don't have any air monitors. So we have no idea what is going on, what kind of air pollution or air quality we have. One day I was with the Fifth Ward, Impact Fifth Ward, and we went a bike ride over there in her area near the Union Pacific creosote facility, the Plume, and the air quality was horrible, and it just made it worse. We were miserable because it was so damn hot. So I just can't imagine how that affects those people that live in that area. So solar farms, smart homes, and air monitors would be really good for our neighborhood. Thank you.
In addressing these issues, these concerns, I saw in the chat somebody asked the weatherization program. Heck, you have to be below poverty level to get way below poverty level to get weatherization. We talk about rain capture systems, all of solar panels, and all the above. A lot of our communities and community members don't have access to that. They don't know how or the process to begin to try to get these things. So that's why it's so important that we stay engaged with our communities and that we educate our communities on the resources that are available to them so that they can utilize them. It is an ongoing effort to try to educate a community and connect them to, but we have to stay connected first of all, and we have to be able to see the long-term aspect and the impact that it's going to have. Sunnyside Southpark was mentioned about their solar panel. Pleasantville has air monitors, and they are up running, and they are actually monitoring. We have a plan, Coco and several other entities, to address the lack of air monitors in Fifth Ward, Denver Harbor, so that we can address the air quality issues there. But we speak of the air quality and the solar panels and all of these things here, but unless we put and hold accountable those who are responsible for our overall healthcare, well-being, sustainability, a quality way of life, then all this is just a conversation and it is mute. So your engagement, your involvement, your willingness to ask questions and become a part of and to share your knowledge, your insight, your information, and tell your story is important as we begin to address climate change and its effects, because it's much, much bigger than what we see on the surface or what we discuss here. But as you've heard, I have stories. Everybody has a story to tell about climate change and its impact on us. But in regard to being able to bounce back, what do we put in place in order to do that? There are several solutions that were brought to the table, but your solution is just as important. So we need to hear, we need to have you engage your voices. I've said many times, they may have the money and the power, but we have the numbers. So utilize those numbers to have an impact on your community. We've seen the suffering in our communities from our seniors and our elders, the neglect, the disabled, and those who just on the fringe of being homeless. And a lot of this is a result of Harvey or Uri or some other issue that hasn't been addressed as far as their housing concerns or and other factors. Healthcare, the pandemic has put a major, has had a major impact on our communities, and especially communities of color. And that in itself too can be connected to climate change as a result of the long-term effect. Would it be as impactful if we had addressed or had expressed a willingness to address climate change issues? And talking about environmental air quality, water quality, all these other things, the plume over near UP, all of the emissions and toxins and the particulate matter, all of these factors that are affecting and having an impact, not just from a healthcare perspective, but also from an economic perspective, from an academic perspective, from a housing perspective. What do we do and who do we hold accountable for maintaining and sustaining our community's ability to bounce back from these disasters and these instances that are affecting us, and utilizing all those tools, everything that we mentioned today, you know, whether it's solar panels, whether it's weatherization, whether it's rain collecting, whatever it is that we need to do that we feel will be helpful to maintain some resiliency in our communities, we need to utilize, because the infrastructure aspect, a lot of conversation about flooding and all that. Ask the question, why is my community continuously flooding, and who's accountable for it? You know, who do I need to contact in order to, what entity do I need to contact in order to address that issue? You know, and it's imperative too that communities come together, because we have a common thread. You know, whether you're in South Park, Sunnyside, the East End, Fifth Ward, Acres Home, it does not matter. We have a common thread of issues that have been neglected and failed to have been addressed. And when you look at the big picture and you begin to connect those dots, you see that every topic, every issue that we've discussed here and we'll continue to discuss, it's all inclusive.
In our communities and neighborhoods up here, we have taken a proactive approach. We clean our own drains. We go to City Hall, we protest, we speak, we do testimonies, we testify at the county level, we protest at the county level. We have been raising, you know, raising Cain is what I'm going to say. Well, actually, we've been raising hell about the way they have disinvested our communities, how they have not paid any attention to the infrastructure, to the health issues, you know, because they perceive us as low income, and we think that they think of us as just expendable. We are not expendable neighborhoods. Our resilience, like Reverend Caldwell was saying about the resiliency, how we can bounce back. We have to adapt, and we have done this. This is an ongoing fight with the city. This is an ongoing fight with the county. They come out here in our neighborhoods and tear down our trees and build these big ditches they want to call retention ponds. They built one behind my house, a retention pond, but you tore down all the natural trees. You sprayed concrete. This is not absorb water. How is this helping us? We have 2 or 3 big detention ponds that they have built, and we are still flooding. Why are you spending money on something that is not helping our neighborhoods? All it does is make mud. It's still our main thoroughfares and everything are still impeded, you know. So this is our fight, the neighborhoods fight, the communities fight, all over Houston. If we don't join together and address these issues ourselves, I don't, you know, It's just an ongoing fight that we must win, not only for ourselves, but for generations coming.
Rita, do you have any final words? And then we'll, or Carmen, and then we'll move to a little Q&A before our breakout room.
I agree with Miss Doris. The thing about it is in Denver Harbor, the people here have been neglected and haven't been listened to for so many years that they don't trust anybody anymore. Trust is a huge issue, and they've just pretty much given up. And unfortunately, not everybody, but it doesn't matter what generation you're in. You're a baby boomer or a millennial. They all kind of got to that point where they say, you know, they don't care about us over here in Denver Harbor. We got to protect our own. But then there's those that don't even do anything about it. They don't clean out their ditches. They're constantly putting their trash, their heavy trash out. As soon as the truck picks up the last load, they're already sticking it out there. They're littering everywhere. It's just on and on and on. And it's very difficult for me. I'm just one individual right now representing Denver Harbor, but there's many in my area who also feel the way I do. Like, what is the city going to do for me? What is Harris County going to do for us? When is the state going to do for us? When is our government going to do for us? You keep saying that you're going to bring these things to our neighborhood, but by the time you get them, we help you vote for the money to get the money. Once you get the money, by the time it trickles down to us, we don't get what we're supposed to get, or we don't get anything at all. Now, I try to do as much as I can, and I work with other individuals in the area, and I have no problem doing it. I need our people in our area to help us, and it would probably be best if we could trust people to come and help us. You know what I mean? If we can get that trust and build a relationship, like I like to build my relationship with Reverend Caldwell and with Carmen and with Jamie and so forth and so forth, but to get them to come out here and show these people that we're not here to hurt you, we're trying to help you, and let's build up this neighborhood so that it doesn't get bulldozed down and then other people get to enjoy it. This is a great neighborhood to live in. It's a great neighborhood to raise kids. It's a great neighborhood to grow old after you become an empty nester. It's a nice neighborhood. It's close to downtown. It's like 10, 15 minutes from everything. It's great, but it's going to be gone in a matter of years because people are, one, not taking care of it because whatever reason they don't do it. It's a blue collar, and so most people work and they take care of their family and they don't have time for anything else. I need people to be more engaged. And then two, other people are going to enjoy it besides ourselves because we don't do anything for ourselves, and that's what they want, for it to be destroyed so they can come and bulldoze it out and bring in other affluent people. So sorry, I kind of went off on the gentrification cause there. But that's also a part of climate change, the gentrification, if you think about it. Okay, I'm getting off my soapbox now.
Stephanie, I just want to kind of add to this. The city has quite a few programs, weatherization, repair, but I want to touch into the qualification criteria that they use. In the city of Houston, the qualification to get your house weatherized is about $19,000 for a family of one. Is very, very different in other areas of the country, like Portland, that they have $65,000, $69,000 for a family of one, up to 80 something for a family of four, which here in Texas is very excluded. Instead of helping people, these programs, and this is a conversation that we're having with the city, right? You have all these programs for people that they don't exist. They have an excellent tune-up on air conditioner, right? But the communities that they need it the most, they don't have central air conditioner. They just have window units. So how can we redesign these programs or layer those programs in a way that they really address the needs of the community? Because addressing some community that they have more impact by climate change, in reducing greenhouse gases, we're going to be addressing the rest of the community with that, right? Because if we decrease greenhouse gases, the impact on the climate is going to be really beneficial for all of us. So that's what I would like to see more, to kind of shift resources to address the people that we they are in the front lines of this crisis. And with that, we're going to be addressing the rest of the people too. So how do we do that? How do we move our elected officials into doing this and investing in communities that they are? Because you have here a lot of stories. And I don't know most of the people in this call, but I bet climate change is impacting different people in a very different way. So I think this is something that we should press elected officials to do more.
Great, thank you, Carmen. We are running low on time. We're gonna hop into a breakout room in a minute, but Kirk, I know you had wanted to say something earlier, and I think Miss Betty as well had her hand up. So Betty, do you want to just quickly go, and then Kirk? Betty, are
Do
you?
I want to? Do I
Yeah,
want
go.
to do what?
You had your hand raised earlier, so we have just a couple minutes for a broader discussion now.
Oh, okay. What mine is a little too broad, so no, I don't want to discuss it. I was going to discuss the concerns I had in my neighborhood because I was a part of documenting the information from the ambassadors about a survey we did with the problems of climate problems in our community. And I was going to discuss some of the things attached to that survey. And it was really a little lengthy, but most of it was discussed through Miss Dorothy and Miss Carmen and Brother Caldwell and Rita. So the only thing that I would have added was that we talk about gardening more, gardening in our own communities, since we all live in desert desert communities, and we need to practice gardening more, because when we were doing that, that seemed to work real well in our communities. I don't know why it stopped, but it's something that we really should consider doing again, because just like prescription drugs can be an enormous problem for us health-wise, so can the desert community that we live in. And planting trees in our community is something that we should consider again, because uh, all the trees that were cut down in our community were a negative impact to us too. And we should consider those things again in our community. And that's things that we can consider doing ourselves or having that done in our community. And I hope we go back to that again. And I did want to indicate that the bugs we see from stagnant water and the illegal dumping in our communities. I'm older, I'm 70 years old, and most of the older citizens in our community will agree with me. We don't even recognize some of these bugs we see. Some of these bugs are entirely different from the bugs that we saw when we were growing up in these communities. We don't see flies like we used to see flies. We see these giant flies. We see all sorts of different roaches than we saw when we were coming up. It's just a whole different culture of bugs. Some of them we don't even know the name of them. And just like everyone on this panel has said, we see things so very different from what we saw as we were coming up from children. And all of that is indication of climate change and climate differences. And I wanted to remind people that when Al Gore was trying to get us to listen to global warming and the threat of global warming, nobody wanted to hear it. Well, here it is, right here facing us in the face, right here looking at us in our communities, impacting us in our community. The threat that global warming was bringing us and has brought us, and we'll continue to look at if we don't become active in the face of global warming, in the face of climate changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Betty. Thank you for that reminder. And Kirk.
Hello.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. And my comments are pretty straightforward and also pretty direct. And I don't think in this forum and any other forum like SEER or any other advocacy group needs to spend a whole lot of time talking about what may happen. Climate change is a broad subject. Climate change is not an exact science yet. We do know that climate change is upon us, and we do know that climate change is a factor that we will have to live with in the future. However, no one knows exactly what that means. There are things out there that is not a question of if they will happen, it's when they will happen. And those are the type of things that I think that we need to prepare our communities to face up to. Like, we know that a Uri is going to happen again, and it's not going to be 10 or 15 years down the line before it happens again. Therefore, we need to prepare our residents for occurrences and make elected officials and governments know. I'm talking about the congressional. I'm talking about commissioners court. I'm talking about city government. We need to have systems in place that will prepare our residents, especially our lower income Black and brown residents, for that occurrence to happen again. We know that it will not be 10 or 15 years before we have another flooding event, before we have another Harvey.
Mm-hmm.
So we need, in order to be resilient and to have a resiliency plan, those are the things that we need to round the wagons up right now in defense of. We need to prepare our homes, especially those that aren't weatherized and all of that. That there needs to be pipe protection plans going on right now that will get a family through another Uri event.
Yeah, Kirk, we're getting a little short on time, and we still have a breakout room to do.
Okay.
But I think the next step, and I think you've really opened it up for our breakout room, because what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about some of these questions that have been brought up through our conversation here and through what you were saying, Kirk, is how do we how are our neighborhoods preparing for climate change, and how can we organize our neighborhoods to take climate action and to make these preparations and to find ways to both improve our response to emergency situations that happen like Harvey, but also, are there any opportunities for weatherization, for solar, for gardens, for these other things that'll provide climate benefits? So what I'm going to do right now is
Miss
put you all out
Stephanie,
onto breakout
Stephanie,
rooms.
Miss Stephanie, I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't know that you could say anything. I won't take but a minute. But
Excuse me, Miss Magruder. We're going to go to breakout rooms where we'll discuss this. That's what she's doing now, because in the interest of time. Thank you.
And Miss Magruder, when we pop back, we can have time for a couple additional comments. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the idea that we live in the 21st century. We should not just keep on with the 20th century. We need to come up with new innovative ideas. One of the new innovative ideas I got, just take a minute, is instead of, you know, the cars rolling with the gasoline and the oil, we can come up with electromagnetic field. And we could put the cars on magnetic ties, and they could lock on just like you went to a car wash. That would solve the pollution problem, and we would do it only on the freeways. It would be set like you could go the speed of 70. So, you know, if you get on that freeway, you could not go no faster than that. So that would stop, you know, all this distraction driving. It would stop, you know, police car chase. It would almost solve many problems when it comes to air pollution. And then we need, with the Houston police or any police department, we need to get the police department to be big brothers and sisters to our children so we can stop all this killing. And then with the
Yes.
gardening, everybody who have a home need to have a garden in their backyard. Those
Yeah,
my
thank
ideas.
you.
Those my opinion.
Thank you for that. And I think those are some really innovative ideas, which is exactly, you know, what we need to address this crisis. So, all right, I'm going to put everyone in breakout rooms. And again, the question is how is your neighborhood preparing for climate change, and how can we continue to organize within our neighborhoods and our communities to prepare for both the disasters, but also to make these improvements to help reduce emissions and to help create solutions.